Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is Tailored Experiences Delivering Personalization with a First-Party Data Strategy, a panel discussion. I'm David Robb, founder and CEO of the CDP Institute, if you believe everything you read. And I'm delighted to be here. And we have two distinguished panelists to join us, and they will introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Zach. I work for Merlin Entertainments. I'm Global Head of Optimization and Delivery, which is a very fancy title. Effectively, it means I do the optimization of our back-end systems, including work around data, personalization, customer data platforms, etc.
Hi everyone, I'm Trevor Gordon. I just finished as Global Transformation Director for Customer at Diageo, where did a lot of very similar things as Zach mentioned, so is responsible for all of the global technology, solutions, data, operations, strategy. Starting a new role very soon, which I can't yet announce, but looking forward to today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. So very distinguished pair of panelists. And let's get to it. Anyone, of course, has any questions at any point, feel free to interrupt or raise your hands or any way you want to communicate the fact that you have a question. It's fine by me. So, gentlemen, why don't we start with first things first, which is why bother? Why do personalization?
Excellent question, and one that I ask myself every day. It's easy. You deliver personalization to give customers a better experience, to be able to deliver the right experience to that particular customer at that point in time through whichever channel makes most sense to them. And this is obviously linked to business outcomes. It's to deliver a better experience to increase conversion, increase average basket values, and what have you. Fundamentally, the two can go hand in hand. Customers say that they are willing to give up data if you will personalize an experience to them because it makes their life easier. It makes it much easier for them to find the things they want, to get the experiences that they want in a way that works for them.
Hi, thanks. Just to add some builds onto what Zach said. Let's distinguish between customer experience and customer engagement. So if you look at that best-in-class world experience, almost any website or app these days is pretty good. It's a fairly good customer experience. But if we look at the cost of acquiring a customer behind the cost of retaining a customer, it's 5 times as expensive to acquire a customer. So to build that relationship and engagement with your customers to retain them is good. The loyalty and advocacy to brands or services these days isn't there. So using personalization, whether it's personalization of content, offer, recommendation, or journey is key. To Zach's point, which is right, you need to understand why you're doing it. Personalization costs. You get it wrong, terrible experience, terrible engagement. So knowing what outcomes, what use cases you want to do is really important. It should be at the heart of your customer strategy.
So is it just marketing, personalization, or it's a little broader than that, I think?
I think it's much broader. So I work for Merlin Entertainments. For those who don't know, we're the second largest entertainment provider in the world. We run theme parks and various attractions. And personalization of experience is just as important. How do we deliver a more enriching and engaging experience to the customer as they're walking through our parks? How do we make their lives easier? For anyone who's been to Thorpe Park recently, you could easily be stood in a queue for an hour and a half if you're in the wrong area for a particular ride. What if we could tell you that the rides that you like on the other side of the park actually have a 20-minute queue and you're going to get a better experience because you'll get more rides in? There's a lot more that can be done around that experience, around personalizing something to an individual, especially when it comes to customers who have certain accessibility needs. How do we give them a much better, much smoother, and more relevant experience?
Just add some builds, but first to answer David's question, no, it's just not about the marketing. You got to think about that lifetime value and that whole element of that end-to-end customer journey and the touch points with that. And we're looking at this across the whole elements of sales and serve. If we think about, the concept of next best action for your customer at a touch point at a certain time in their journey has been around for over a decade. And if you look at the personalization around that, that is probably going to help in getting the outcome that you want to drive with that. At Diageo, for example, we distinguish between consumer data, which is our direct-to-consumer business, and then from our B2B perspective, our customers. That could be a Tesco outlet, could be your off-license, everything else. We use personalization across both. And if we think about areas like around product recommendations, follow-on, returns, things like that, we find on the service side that personalization works really, really well. So it doesn't mean that, for example, you're digitizing and doing everything with chatbots and having their names there, but it's personalization at the right point at the right time. So remember, whilst you're looking for efficiency and automation, and personalization helps to drive that, there's still the element of humanity, which is super important, particularly as we started to get into things like AI and all that good stuff.
I think actually, just to quickly add as well, one thing that I always struggled with early on is understanding that personalization isn't about what we do to deliver an experience to a customer, but how we give them the option to personalize their own journey with us. So that is not delivering messages through single channel, but allowing them to engage through multiple channels in a way that makes sense for them, and understanding and recognizing that so that we can help to make that easier.
So that brings the question of how you know you're doing it right, how you know you're getting value, you're giving them value, that they're actually giving them what they want. How do you know you're justifying the cost from the ROI perspective?
As with anything in the modern world, it's measurement. It's how do we do this logically? What are the KPIs we're trying to affect? How can we then measure that? How can we check to make sure that we're getting the desired impact? How do we continue to monitor and adjust that journey and optimize it as we go so that we know that we're delivering the best experiences for the individual customer sets? It becomes a lot more complex the more granular you go in that personalization, but it's still very important to do.
So before you go, specifically what KPIs might be appropriate?
I always find this a difficult one because I think it's very much based on the individual use cases, because each of these use cases, each of these personalization elements is different. So conversion rate, average basket values, those kinds of things are quite key for the online experience, for driving people through a booking journey. But an experience-led one for us in theme parks could be the one I mentioned before about moving people around. That could be average rides per guest in a day, because we know that's an important metric that impacts satisfaction. So it has to be broken down use case by use case to know exactly what it is you're trying to do, and then what are the KPIs relevant to that particular use case.
I think, just to build on Zach's point, I think there's a real tendency when you start to measure the outcome of the value is to overcomplicate it, and the best is to keep it simple. Merlin is a big global company, Diageo is a big global company, because what you don't want is in every country market starting to have different measures of success, different outcomes, different use cases. You want those common strategies, those common platforms, those common experiences. So I think just in terms of that is trying to keep it as simple as possible. As per Zach's view, it is very much looking at that use case driven there. And then example of being able to show, I guess the investment side is personalization costs. You know, if we look at all the vendors here today, all of them are promising you to deliver real-time hyper-personalization. But if you even look at, say, for example, let's say the data latency requirements in terms of some form of near real-time personalization, there's probably very few data cases where it's actually real-time data feeds are actually needed. And actually, you can get a data latency of maybe up to 15 seconds once per hour. So you've got to look at what you're trying to achieve. How can you then actually deliver against that? Keep it simple and then measure that outcome. The other aspect of this as well is hyper-personalized sounds good, but you don't want to freak out your customers. And then the other aspect is how do you still balance? So everyone talks about the nirvana of one-to-one relationships, hyper-personalization. But ultimately, your marketing teams are going to still do segmentation. So how do you balance the segmentation and the personalization together?
I thought you were going to answer. No. But think about it. So hi, this side of the room. Don't mean to turn our back to you, but we love you equally. So much for personalization. What about first-party data? First of all, so someone define first-party data, just like asking for a friend kind of thing?
Okay, so first-party data is data that you capture about the customer directly.
Fair enough. As opposed to 0, second, third. Is there a fourth party? I don't
Go
know.
on.
I'll give it exactly, just to build on to Zach's points. You could look at 10 or 11 subcategories of first-party data. I'll put it into 3. First one is demographic, your customer profile data. Second one will be your purchase or transactional data, your historical data. Third one, let's call your digital exhaust, and you can put everything else in there. You know, what pages you've looked at, what you've opened, what mobile app device you're using. But you know, trying to translate this into, like, say, simple, easy to understand terms to non-techie or non-marketing people who need to understand this, I always find those things work quite well. You can look at loyalty programs and all of this, but in terms of first-party data, it's there. To David's point, zero-party data, it's a subset of that data you hold on your customers. But I think I always use that as a general 3 buckets of first-party data. I've been using it for 15 years. I haven't changed it yet.
That sounds good. So what's so great about first-party data? Why are we having a whole session just on first-party data?
Good question. First-party data can give you an understanding of what it is your customer wants, what they want in that particular moment, if we're talking about the behavioral data. What's their intent, and what are they trying to achieve? So then how can you help them to achieve that? It gives you a view of the customer as well that is, shall we say, arguably slightly more realistic than zero-party data, which is data that they give to you directly. As Steve Jobs taught us, the customer doesn't always know what they want until you tell them what they want. So being able to observe the person in that instant, in the instant that they're engaging with you, allows you to understand the intent and personalize towards that intent to make that journey easier.
Thanks. Just to add some builds on to Zach's point, I just seen an old colleague from Vodafone, so I'll relate this back to a Vodafone story. First-party data, it's the richness of it, the accessibility of it. And then also, let's say, around the data privacy and the regulation. So these customers will have signed up and opted in with us directly. So you've got that ability there. You can also understand, look at their permissions and preferences and how you do that. You can then align that with a lot of your, say, overall usage, your product data, your whatever data you want to use, and start to actually bring that together and start to build out some really cool use cases, really starting to understand that customer and start, I think this is the thing, start simple, look at those use cases, but if you really leverage that first party data well, build up that single view of the customer, you can start to experiment and look at the art of the possible.
So are there particular use cases that first-party data makes possible that you can't do without it, or that it really makes way better because you could do it without it? Just like, what's a good use case, or several good use cases for first-party data?
For us at Merlin, one of the most important use cases we have is how do we drive a better journey through our ecosystem. We sell tickets to attractions, but we also sell hotels. And we used to have to make people self-select. I want a ticket, or I want to stay overnight. But we had no way to actually know if those customers were more willing to. So one of the really quick, easy ones we can do is drive time data. If you live more than 2.5 to 3 hours from a park, we know you probably want to stay over. It makes more sense. That's a quick, easy use that we were able to do that we weren't able to do without that data. It gave us that ability to really understand what might make sense to the customer and deliver that to them primarily.
For us at Diageo, it was a fairly simple one again. We've started a B2B loyalty program. And everyone's going, loyalty program? But when you have a million outlets in 180 different countries, the complexity of actually starting to use that is together. And so by incentivizing those customers to give us that first-party data has given us a richness and access to data we hadn't had before, particularly where we consider a lot of our route to consumer and route to market is indirects. So it's starting to build and let's say foster that relationships with a lot of customers we hadn't had in that space. So the first party data and some of the things we were able to see that we were able to do with it from that was really, really powerful. So any loyalty program that you're looking at and starting, absolutely necessary.
Okay, so we use it for loyalty, we use it for experience management, so lots of particular uses for first-party data. So someplace in this description here it says something about data strategy. We could talk, I guess technically we should talk about data strategy. So what would be a first-party data strategy?
Yeah. Oh, I hadn't expected this one.
Ah,
To me,
not that funny.
I look at. I'll touch on two things. I'll touch on a bit of around AI and machine learning, but I'll just talk about. I always look at data strategy from a customer point of view. How do we better understand and engage our customers? How do we better understand their motives? I think Zach said something really poignant. It's probably the word, which is we don't own our customers' experiences. They own their experiences. But how can we use our data and all of the things we have in our marketing tool chest to influence their behavior to drive the outcomes that we want? So I always view a data strategy through the lens of a customer strategy. It should be driven by what is the commercial strategy, what are your outcomes you're trying to go, and then the data strategy is actually looking from that. I started off as a direct marketeer, and one of the fundamentals to me is no place has cracked a single view of a customer or a single view of a consumer or a single view of a household. But you can start building it, you can actually start collecting that data, cleaning that data, accessing that data, and using that data. So at the heart of that data strategy should be the basis of what your commercial and customer strategy is, and then starting to look at the basics of forming that single customer view and some of the fundamentals we're looking at, like customer lifetime value, the customer end-to-end journey, and all of that stuff to go together. The best thing I would say about a data strategy is, yeah, been using AI, machine learning for years, but just keep it simple, because otherwise you will get confused by data scientists and a lot of techies who will try and sell you a lot of stuff that you don't need.
Yeah, and I think certainly for us at Merlin, we have very complex, difficult data that we don't own directly at source. Getting that into a single customer view was difficult. Single customer view in any form, even with holes throughout it. But it's about making those first steps, moving towards a view of the customer that makes sense, that allows you to ground everything you do in an understanding of the customer. It comes down to how you understand the customer, what you can gain about them, what you can understand about them, and how you can then build from that. And it is an iterative process. It continues, that data strategy continues on how do you clean that data, how do you enrich that data, how do you get better and better at this over time, knowing that there will be no endpoint, because I've never seen a perfectly clean data set in my life. So it's about incremental improvements over time.
Okay, so strategy for the first-party data has to do with incrementality, about working towards specific business goals, use case goals. Okay, and just to be fair, I didn't tell these guys I was going to ask a strategy question, so just threw that in to keep them on their toes. All right, but we did say we're going to talk about advantages and disadvantages of first-party data versus other kinds of data. So talk about that one.
I think we talked about some of the advantages of it, which is they're your customers. So from a legal and data privacy point of view, they will have opted in. I think also the richness of the data, which I've mentioned before, is there. And Zach's touched on it, which is you can continue to collect and build upon it and incentivize your customers to give that more data. So if you're thinking of, when you think of your single customer view, really all you're talking about is a set of data attributes that you want to understand, you want to collect information on to better understand your customer. And a simple test I would always use is, what are the top 5 things you want to know about a customer to do that? So those are the advantages. The disadvantages are some of the ones that David and Zach have mentioned. A lot of them are the data is held in multiple sources. The quality of the data, the integrity of the data, the confidence of the data. And then also as well, it's the ability to actually understand and interpret what the data is actually telling you. That could be second or third party, but the fact that you've got access to that first party, yes, you can have data scientists that understand that and say it's telling you this, but when you're trying to interpret that and have, marketing strategists, marketing operation people trying to then devise strategies, use case and campaigns off of that, that's the real challenge, I would say.
I think one additional one for me is the volume of data. That can be a massive advantage because you can get data about anything, about everything that a customer is doing, that every touch point they have with you. But that volume of data can be a disadvantage as well because you can get lost in it. You can get lost in the complexity and the amount of things you can look at, when actually what you need to do is keep it simple. Look at those individual use cases. Look at, as Trev said, the 3-4 key things that you need to know about the customer to achieve that, and work with that. Don't try and get everything in and understand everything. Understand the pieces you need to get the outcomes you need. It always has to be outcome linked.
Okay, so following up on that with keeping things simple and doing things incrementally, and you both mentioned data quality, data cleanliness is sort of a difficult issue and kind of endless issue that never goes away. So how do you focus? What's your strategy for how do you decide how clean is clean enough? How do you prioritize? Like, how do you deal with data quality in this context?
No, really good question, David. And I think in terms of your data quality, it's not like a one-off project that you start and go, we're done. It's something that you continue to do. And no organization I've worked at has cracked its data quality and its data integrity. You just need to continue to improve it and look at and use it for everything else. This is where a really good CDP, so I talk about not needing the tech, but at the same time, I'm a marketeer that's gone into the tech side. You get the right CDP, the right kind of, let's say, ecosystem working together. A lot of that is either automated or semi-automated. And then when you start to measure and then analyze the quality of your data, you then start to focus the use cases you want around that, what data attributes you want to use, and you're continually using that test and learn. It's super, super powerful. So I would say in terms of your data quality, you need the data operations, the processes and procedures to obviously in there to cleanse it. The one thing I would add is then really question how you augment that data. So if you're looking at second and third party data, really look at what value is this actually giving us. Everyone's, we use Xperia and other things, so you're obviously going to use that. But really starting to question when you start to augment that with your data with second and third party data, really question why are we doing that and what's that giving us that we don't already have.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I'd say that we always want to be looking to improve that data, as we said. But it's important to start to start on that journey as soon as possible, even if it's just in a test environment or with a subset of customers, to try and understand not only to understand the answer to that question, how clean is clean enough? Well, you'll only know by doing. You'll only know by getting stuck in, seeing how it works. Is it delivering the results that you want? And then how can you incrementally build on those results and improve them over time? Because neither side of this remains static. I've just gone through this whole thing with our work around customer data platform. It's not a project to be put in and left. It's a program of work that needs to continue indefinitely. And that is around the data cleanliness, but also the continuing evolution of use cases and improvements and optimizations to that. The data is only as good as what you do with it. So both of those two things have to work hand in hand. And the sooner you get started, the sooner you'll start to understand where you need to improve and where you need to change.
I would just add one build to that. Myself, David, and Zach were discussing this before. Remember that, stating the obvious here, to Zach's point, when you look to purchase a piece of tech, you're not just purchasing the tech, you're purchasing a partnership with the company that's both selling it to you. So how do you influence that product roadmap? But then how do you also select the right partners to help you in that journey that we're just discussing now? Most of our businesses will not have the in-house expertise or resource to actually crack that. Most of you will have really great people in that area, but you need the support from those partners and those tech providers to help you make the most out of the tech and platforms that you're purchasing.
All right, well, I cannot resist asking, so how do you pick the best tech partners? What determines who's the right partner in a given situation?
It comes down to requirements. It comes down to a lot of requirements, but generally the one thing that I look for more than anything else in a partner is that. It's a partner, someone who not only is doing the things that you ask them to do, but challenging you and willing to help you build your knowledge and build your understanding and fill those gaps that you don't know. Especially when it comes to this kind of stuff, for us with Customer Data Platform, we know the use cases we want to do now. I don't know the ones we want to do in 3 years' time, and I don't know the gaps that we're missing because of the knowledge we don't have. I'm relying on the expertise of that partner to push back on us to say, think about this, this, and this. Because a lot of those decisions will affect what we're doing in the early stages when we're building that data strategy, the data model, all of these foundational elements. We need to be taking into account that expertise that comes from those partners. So it has to be that richer two-way relationship for me.
Thanks. Yeah, just to add a build onto that, I would say is it's speaking to your peers and colleagues that you know from within your industry and other companies as well, and really starting to see it in practice where it's being used. I think if we look at, let's say, the potential functionality of a lot of CDPs in the marketplace today, the sophistication of the technology is way beyond most of the things any of our businesses will want to do with that in the next 1 to 2 years. But you don't want to be buying a Rolls Royce of a CDP and using 10% of the functionality. So when you're looking at that, what does that 2 to 3 year roadmap look like? How can you influence that vendor's roadmap? How can you input into that? And how can you maximize that's the potential functionality of that CDP to drive your strategy forward? So don't get blinded by the bright lights, as I have done in the past, but just trying to think about, to Zach's point, where do we want to be in 3 years? How can this CDP help us deliver that?
Okay, that's very strategic question. Was there a question? Yeah.
Thank you. Hello? Hello? Ooh, hey. When it comes to using the first-party data, I understand what you're saying in terms of they've got your permission, or you've got their permissions. One of the issues I feel with relying on first-party data too much is that it can become an echo chamber, where it only reflects the data you've previously collected, so it only reflects your old ways of working, and it doesn't reflect your new ways of working you want to move to. How would you say we can counter that?
Did you hear him say that?
Did you not?
No, did you?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Go on.
I think your question was not just over reliance on first-party data and kind of how do you align it with use as second, third party? The noise was difficult to hear. Sorry.
Maybe. Hang on. There we are. That's about right. Yeah, it was about if you're going to be using your first-party data, that's going to reflect your current ways of working, not where you want to be. So is there a risk you create an echo chamber where you think you're personalizing, but actually you're just working into old ways of working, as opposed to actually delivering anything new to the client? You're
right. And so we're talking about first-party data, but wherever I work, I always use second and third-party data and zero-party data. You need it all working together. You need a coherent strategy. As an example, we have the last two organizations, current one I'm advising and previously at Diageo, we started to dip our toe like a lot of your companies would in terms of marketplaces. So if you look at even that and the complexity of that around your marketplace operations, your data operations, you're going to need that richness of what second, third party and zero party data give you. So it's when you do that, let's say the overall data strategy, you need that cohesiveness. But what I would say is for a lot of the fundamentals of any customer data strategy is going to be around that first party data. And it's always a work in progress. So I don't know if that, I'll see if Zach's got any, and David got any builds.
I was just going to touch on the point that you mentioned, I think, around the staleness of that first-party data as well. Not all data is created equal, and there is a natural degradation to the usefulness of data over time. So what you learn about someone, if they're browsing on the web, is relevant for only seconds. But a booking at an attraction might be relevant for a couple of months. And so it's about weighting your data in that way as well, in understanding what is relevant right now to the intention or the decision that the customer wants to make, and how do you build for that degradation of data? How do you make sure that you're prioritizing certain pieces over and above others?
Okay, and I think also, if I heard the question correctly, it was about what happens if my business changes and I have some need that I didn't need. So, let's just give a crazy example. Maybe there's a global pandemic and all of a sudden we're doing things digitally that we didn't used to do. I'm just hypothetically here, right? Well, I couldn't really predict that. I mean, unless I'm really smart. So, absent a crystal ball, how can, the question becomes, this gets back to the strategy question, how can I make my organization or my technology able to be very agile, so if I do get an unexpected requirement, I can adapt to that requirement as quickly as sort of technically and humanly possible. And the first step to that is just even recognizing, as you say, that that's a contingency that I might have to deal with. So maybe that's another question that could have a little more discussion of how do I accommodate unknown future needs? How do I be agile with my data?
Well, do you want me to? I think agile with the data, we've kind of touched on it, which is more around the experimentation. There's probably no one here that's not experimenting with ChatGPT or language models in terms of their service or their sales. So it's looking at how you innovate and do that. And I guess, the one thing which is a bit of a cliche, is how do you productize that data and how do you kind of continually look to develop and use it? So in the marketing space, yes, but for example, at Diageo, we've really had to put in some new structures and ways of doing that, of how do we take that product view of it to kind of can really continue to do it. The challenge of that is if you see an initiative where you are, to David's point, you do find something that you could really do, but you're doing that in a lab, how do you then scale that in a business in 180 countries?
Yeah, and for me, this isn't about agility of data, it's about agility of business processes. How do you adjust the business? How do you build a structure that can be spontaneous, that can adjust when these kinds of things happen? I know a lot of the banks who are engaging highly in personalization dealt with the cost of living crisis and the strain on people's mortgage payments by being able to jump into those customers it felt might have problems to allow them flexibility in their payments. And that's a really quick adjustment that they made that showed that they had that agility within the business to do that.
Right, and I think that is something you consciously engineer for, to have that capability, to have that agility. All right, so that actually, the banking example brings up a privacy question, and we cannot discuss first-party data or personalization without talking to privacy. So how does that factor into your data strategy?
Privacy is super important when it comes to first-party data. As Trev said, everyone opts in, their customers, they've said they want to give you this data, but how you use that data is still really important. We've already heard once the term creepy today. Using data and personalizing excessively can be somewhat creepy. It can be somewhat weird to the customer. It's about making sure that you use it respectfully as well. Engaging in the right people within your business, the DPO, so that you're getting the right data protection coverage to make sure that everything is compliant in a way that it should be. But also, especially moving into AI areas where AI algorithms can inherently be biased, is making sure that you're accounting for that as much as possible, that you're mindful of that and testing for that when you're bringing these kinds of algorithms into play. It is a complex landscape for that kind of thing, but it's, as long as you do the legwork, as long as you work with the relevant people within the business, I think it helps to smooth that.
Just to add some builds on that, I think probably every business that you work at here will have cracked GDPR permissions and preferences and how customers opt in and opt out. But where we're seeing it now with the acceleration of AI and machine learning in terms of that is both around the orchestration, and I'd also say areas around almost like the product recommendations and how you actually may potentially monetize that data. Not monetize it by selling it to a third party, but how do you actually engage your customers to get to that point. What I would say is, you have the regulatory, but it's also the confidence of your data is in there. So the things like the customer panels, having some openness and explainability around your AI, your algorithms and things there, and not just doing it for just to do it, but actually genuinely do it. So, for example, we've started customer panels both on the B2C, the D2C and the B2B side, and it's really there so much that some of the customers are providing testimonials and saying you could go much further. So that's one thing I'd really look at. Get the basics right around privacy, but as you start to go more into AI and machine learning, really start to engage some of your panicles in that. The whole thing needs to be around ethical AI.
So let me drill down, because it's important. We talked about business process as opposed to technology, and it's easy to say don't be creepy. I mean, raise your hand if you want to be creepy, right? Anybody here want to be creepy? No, nobody wants to be creepy, right? But how do you prevent your company from being creepy? Because there's more than just having an aspiration to be uncreepy, right? So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think Trav's point there is really good. It is customer panels, is getting engagement from the customer around what it is you're doing. We have loyalty members, and we use our platinum loyalty members as a test group to help us there. As part of their incentive, they can get engaged in helping us improve products. So they can help give feedback. Does this work for you? Is this the right kind of process? But getting that's the only true way you'll know. You can have the aspiration as much as you want, but until things are in the marketplace, you don't know how they're going to be perceived by the customer. And so getting that feedback is vital, and if you can do it in a controlled, managed way, it's going to give you better results.
And aligning with the point of keeping it simple, keep your ears to the ground. If you work in an omni-channel business where you have a physical presence and a digital presence, the people working at that shop front interacting with your customers are going to hear whether something's creepy or annoying. So you don't need to wait 3 or 4 months to see if a personalized campaign is working well. You'll get instant reaction quite quickly. And if something's just like annoying, like there's nothing more annoying than giving a product recommendation for something that you would have bought maybe a month ago. So if you see something's not working, ears on the ground, react quickly, and just have those processes and procedures to be able to do that.
And actually, let me follow up on that, because that's one of the things that we see in a great deal of the research that we review, is that if you ask the senior management and the frontline workers a question about that, very different perspectives. And if you ask consumers versus marketers about how good a job are we doing with personalization or whatever, again, very, very different answers. So you really need to be open. I'm assuming we're all senior managers here, to getting the information from the other parts of the organization, so that you're not kind of just in your little bubble and you assume you're doing a great job, but in fact maybe not so much. So, my 2 cents. All right, so we are almost out of time, another 5 minutes or so.
Question?
Yeah, question. We love questions. Where? Oh, hi Dave.
Hello? Yes. It's a really quick question about the business case for a CDP, where the brand doesn't have a direct transactional relationship with the consumer. How do you determine that case that will actually get approved ultimately by decision makers?
So the business model is you've got an indirect business model where you're going through wholesalers and distributors. Yeah, that was a real challenge for us, because if you look at the ongoing and evolution of that, your wholesalers and distributors will be investing in that technology. So they're going to be collecting that customer data, influencing more and more of that outcome. And every business is trying a D2C, whatever. And so what we really looked at to help kind of, let's say, because if we look at Diageo, D2C is a small element of the business. And a really large part of this was almost protecting what we have and actually becoming more data driven. And it wasn't just about the marketing, but using that CDP all the way from use cases back in the supply chain to fulfillment to product range and assortment. So we looked at use cases not only in the customer engagement, but the other data points we could collect at to build that. And it was also kind of not painting the doomsday scenario in 4 to 5 years. Our wholesalers and partners and distributors are investing in this, but we would lose what control we would have of that customer engagement and that customer understanding if we didn't. So that was kind of, let's say, the basis of the genesis of the use case, of the business case.
I don't really have anything to add to that because we're direct to customer.
Right, but now, of course, that data is first-party data to the distributor, but it's second-party data to you. So just make that point, because we love to distinguish between first and second-party data. Okay, our questions here. Well, let's just go to tips, because we're almost done. So, if there were 3 things pieces of advice, tips you could give, and very practical tips for making the most of first-party data for personalization, what do you think they should do? What do you hope they'll do?
3 in your head already? Go on.
I'll just give one, which is, I've said it a couple times, keep it simple. Like, if you're looking at a point and blaming not getting started in a meaningful way on your data, you can put your data in a marketing data mart. You can start with a couple of use cases. So it's better to start, keep it simple, test and learn, and get moving on it. I would try and get some maturity around that. I thought the chap's point over there was around the same time. Understand what the business case is for it. Other point that David mentioned is when you start to look at, if you haven't invested in the partners and the platforms yet, get that understanding of what's that strategy, what are you trying to achieve, what's the business case, and then go into that selection. And don't get blinded by the best product out there, but choose the product and the partner that's going to help you get the most benefit from that technology.
I would say speak to as many people as you can in your business. You can't do this kind of thing in a silo. It has to be, you're going to need other people within the business for activations of first-party data, for collection, for understanding potential use cases. There's so many wide things, and what we did very early on was just try and run and drive this project centrally. And it wasn't until we started to open out to the wider business that we saw we'd missed like 50% of the things we needed to cover off. So talk to as many people as you can, as early as you can on that journey. To our point earlier as well, get started today, tomorrow, as soon as possible. Don't wait for perfect data, don't wait for perfect situation, just move forwards with something. I know some people who've started to do their personalization through a call center and an Excel spreadsheet. Just get going, prove the case out, because that will prove the business case. It will prove that there's value in personalization itself, and then you can move to complex CDPs and providers and what have you.
Okay, well, let me add a couple as well. Then one, to just build on what you said about measurement, proving out the value of the business case. Again, doesn't have to be complicated. Very simple metrics to be used that can be done to show immediate value. And the other point that also is data quality is very much contextual. It's really the use of the data for a particular purpose. So bear that in mind when you're thinking about your data quality. Is, well, how am I going to use this data and what's adequate quality for that purpose? Not what's this, platonic ideal of perfect data, which is what takes you down that rabbit hole that you never escape from. So on that possibly cheerful note, was that a cheerful note? Close enough. Thank you all. If there are additional questions, I'm sure we'll be hanging around for a little bit. But have a good rest of the day. Thank you again.
Thank you.